have David Kenny of Nielsen joining us today. Thank you, David, and welcome. And we're going to do something special this afternoon and ask one of our longtime supporters and board members to introduce David. I'm referring to our good friend Adonis Hoffman, who also serves on the Institute's First Amendment Advisory Council. During his career of more than 30 years, Adonis served as counsel of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, held senior positions at the Federal Communications Commission, and taught at Georgetown University. He now heads his own consulting firm, the Advisory Council, LLC, where he provides advice to corporate CEOs and boards, financial institutions, and international organizations. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for our very own Adonis Hoffman.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be here with you today. As you mentioned, this is the last luncheon of the year. It's been a wonderful year, and I think it's only appropriate for us to take a few minutes to extend our appreciation to Rick Kapler, to Susanna Couto, and to our chairman, Jake Wiley, for the wonderful job they did. Thank you so much. And before I introduce our speaker, I just want to acknowledge a couple of special friends who are here today, some distinguished guests. And if I do not mention your name, it's not that you're not distinguished, it's just that I don't have you on my list. But I want to start by welcoming a first-time visitor to the Media Institute, the distinguished chairwoman of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, Ambassador Rita Lewis. I was going to send a shout out to Mike O'Reilly, but he's not here, so Mike, wherever you are, this is for you, man. Very few people in the media can see the big picture. Many of us, in fact, most of us, view media from a narrow perspective. Consumers want choice and convenience at a good price. Content providers want to reach as many consumers as possible. Advertisers mostly see costs and returns in the bottom line. And even regulators tend to focus somewhat narrowly on just the rules, often overlooking broader market realities. But the media ecosystem is vast, complex, diverse, dynamic, and driven by data. And few of us have the wherewithal, indeed the mandate and responsibility, to see it in its entirety, let alone to make sense of it all and translate that into something meaningful for all the key components within that ecosystem. Our guest speaker today is one of the very few individuals who does just that. David Kenny is the executive chairman of Nielsen Media. In his early career, he was a consultant at Bain & Company. In 1997, he became the CEO of Digitas, leading the company through an initial public offering in 2000 and its subsequent acquisition by Publicis Group in 2007. He was the president of Akamai Technologies, and in 2012 he became CEO of the Weather Company and served as its chairman of the board. When the Weather Channel was acquired by IBM in 2016, David became the senior vice president of IBM's Watson and their cloud platform. He joined Nielsen as its CEO in December 2018 at a pivotal time in the company's history. He saw the company public and took the company private, making a boatload of money, I'm sure, in the process. For someone who has been for lots of people. For someone who's been steeped in data his entire professional life, David has a remarkably broad world view. He has a knowledge of the financial markets, having taken companies public and private, perhaps befitting his MBA from Harvard. And he has a keen awareness of the social impact, not only of media, but of large corporate actors on the global scale. If there's anybody at the epicenter of the media universe, it is our guest speaker today. So please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. David Kenny to the Media Institute.
that was a completely unnecessary and long introduction. But it'll help you kind of understand where I might be coming from. And I have these AI glasses, so they talk to you. But you don't need a teleprompter anymore. You can just wear your glasses. But if you heard from my career, all the time I was in advertising, I would bitch about Nielsen ratings that the numbers were too high, and they were giving credit for audience that wasn't there, and they weren't counting when people were in the bathroom. And then I ran the Weather Channel, and the Nielsen was terrible, and its numbers were too low because we weren't counting everybody who was watching. And then I took this crazy job to see if I could help make it better, and it's been a great privilege to do that. And I would say the first thing you learn when you're at Nielsen is, this year I think this is true, 83 of the top 100 programs in the last 12 months were National Football League games, and the rest were the Olympics. And so it's the thing that works, and what you realize is that people, we don't have division there. We don't have taste. People love sports. Part of what they love is that they know the rules. They can actually tell what's a first down and what's a touchdown. And all of that works because the rules committee sets the rules, and there are referees and judges and umpires in all sports. And what I realized when you come to Nielsen is that's what you get to be, the referee. And no one ever loves the referee. They complain when they get it wrong, and they take it for granted when they get it right. So for me, it's just a privilege for once in a very long time to have people who wanted to see me, so thank you. Because that's what referees are. When I came in 2018, part of what I was brought to the board was I had this history in machine learning and AI, trying to understand new technology. And so we did a reset that is just finishing now for a fundamental change in ratings, because ratings are fundamentally market share. Arthur Nielsen, 102 years ago, was the first person to use the phrase market share. AC Nielsen was built on the belief that every market has scarcity, and the way you compete and you know whether you're winning or losing, the way you make investment decisions, the way you can trust industry is to have a fundamental ground truth of market share. Which is why when there's a lot of different ways people can measure, they still come back to the ratings because it's consistent, and market share matters. But it was my belief that originally market share was for broadcast. That was pretty easy to do. At the time there were 3 on television. There was a handful of networks, and you could do a number of choices against 48 day parts. And the big debate was what to do with cable, but we figured that out. We figured out DVRs, but streaming was going to change things. And so we did make the decision that we had to actually measure time, and we had to measure all time in video and all time on audio, regardless of how it had come. It is our view that that's the right way to judge the market, because that's the way the consumer views it. So we measured all screen time, and we measured all listening time. What I would say, for all the billions of dollars in content, and all the technology, and all the new platforms that are out there, it's still a fixed market, because there still is about 300 million people. That population grows 0.2% a year. There are still 24 hours a day, and neither Google nor Meta have added any to that. And so, there's a little bit of double counting because people are doing 2 things at once now, including some of you right now. I see you. That was the way to get at it. And so we switched to measuring time. And it's a big change, because outside of sports and live events, most of it's not viewed on a schedule when it's streaming. So day parts are kind of less relevant, although they largely watch in the same time periods. People largely watch after dinner. But we moved to a share of day model as well, which I think has been helpful. And we've learned a lot in that process. So when we started this, and the first one came out in 2021, it was like May of 2021, broadcast was 25% of the total, cable was 39%, streaming was 27%, and the rest was 9%. And that was, a big shake because it meant, a little over a quarter of everything was now on streaming. Just 2 years later, if I take the last month, streaming is now 41%, mostly at the expense of cable, which has fallen to 26. Broadcast is still 23, and the rest is about 10, so social media games. So it's moving. But there's more to come, because then we cut the data by age group. So I'm gonna just do under 35 and over 35. Over 35, so a lot of folks in the room, it looks kind of similar. You can feel good that broadcast is 27%, cable is 31%, streaming is 34%, and there's about 7% on others. Under 35, streaming is 65%. Broadcast is 7, cable is 10, and the rest is 20. The 35, those people under 35 are going to be over 35 every year. This is what's coming. So you can just follow the demographics. There's no evidence that it will change back as they age. I think what happens is the people over 35 are getting more of the habits as it becomes easier. So I think it's pretty clear this is inevitable. But I think any of us who are trying to build policy or write rules or we think about ratings, it's impossible for me to understand how you approach the media. And quite honestly, I'd love to see more streaming people in this room. When under 35, it's 2/3 of the time and growing. That's what's changed. Media is fundamentally a streaming on-demand service, and the others are finding their way through, but it's shifting and it's shifting quickly. And I think that is a change that's complicated, and people have business models and they're making decisions about their portfolio, and all that needs to get sorted. But I also think it's really important. Our role in this is to do our best to keep giving people one truth set so they can make decisions as to where the consumer is spending their time, because ultimately all of us are trying to serve an audience, and having our best sense of it and our best sense of the competitive environment. So we know when they're not watching us what they are watching. If they're not getting news from us, where are they getting it from? And we think this could be super helpful. We could do Q&A. A lot of people are asking about how to do that. I would say why has this taken so long? It was a fundamental shift in the way we do it. So when you had 150 channels and 48 day parts, it was kind of a fixed system, and you could get there with statistical analysis with a sample. So we would run around and get people in every county to represent that county and put meters in their homes. That worked, but now they're watching on phones and tablets and TVs, and in lots of other locations than their home. The amount of people watching together is very small outside of sports. People are largely watching individually. So we had to get to individual meters that people actually put in their pockets, that they carry around. And more importantly, we had to bring as much data in as we could, because every TV that's connected to the internet, every car that's connected to the internet for audio gives us data. So we're bringing in a massive amount of data from all the players, cleaning it, correcting it, using the panel to apply demographics and take out bots and make sure we get it right. But it's been a fundamental shift in the way that works. And it's been a worthwhile investment, because I think we all needed to know that. So, my hope for all of you is, whether using ratings or something else, making sure you define the market that broad way, I think is the only way to make the right decisions. Then what's next? And I'm exec chair now, so I've got my CEO. I think where we have to figure out next is AI. And you mentioned I've been around machine learning for a long time. AI is so much easier to use when everything is streamed, so we will just find so much more that is, whether it be news or entertainment content, that is going to be produced with AI. We're all excited about the models. We're all excited about the breakthrough of GPT. But here's the thing about models: those are kind of the engine, but data is the fuel. And data, you can't just put crude oil in an engine. It doesn't work. It's really important that the data like fuel, be refined, be consistent, be something that the funnel knows how to use. It's also really important that it be audited so that we can make sure that it actually came from a true source. A lot of the problem I have with AI right now is that they ran out of data to train OpenAI, so now they have synthetic data, so the AI makes its own data. It's a little bit off, and then the next time it's a little bit more off, and it just keeps drifting. And unfortunately, it drifts in the bias of the programmer. We saw this in weather, that when we did weather models to put them on a phone, the first ones were really good, and then it kind of drifted until you had empirical evidence, so you still needed meters. You still needed anemometers, barometers, thermometers, and in this case, I still think you need empirical evidence of the data about consumers that you're all going to use to feed your models and each other's models. And I don't know that this is the work of Nielsen, but if I were an institute committed to people trusting media, I would spend time on data principles, because I know we're in Washington, but I generally think the government responds late to technology. Industry and self-regulation tends to respond faster. I think the urgent need in my ask for you to consider is what should be generally accepted data principles in the media business. And the analogy I'll give you is the reason the financial markets work, the reason companies buy and sell at the right price, is at the foundation, we have generally accepted accounting principles. And we all kind of agree what's revenue, what's cost, what's EBITDA. Yes, there can be non-GAAP measures, and people try to slough those through, but GAAP measures are still what we use. And you can trust it. Now that data is, particularly customer data, is the fuel of media, what are generally accepted data principles? And as AI is going to be useful in producing content, it's going to be useful in producing news and information, what are generally accepted data principles to know that the data has a true set and can be audited the way financial statements can be audited. Because I think that the data assets in all of your companies are as valuable to you as the financial assets. And certainly what we're trying to figure out is our role in making that easier. But I think it's we can do ratings because we've got a media ratings council and there's an agreement on how to measure. But we need this for data, we need it urgently because AI is going to move at an exponential rate into virtually every business that we're in. So those were the couple of messages I thought would be useful to get the conversation started. And I know people have lots of opinions, so I would I'll take opinions, or I'll take opinions posed as questions, or just questions. Yes, sir.
So when you calculate streaming, does that include like YouTube TV or some of these over-the-top services, or how do you break those out into your categories that you gave in regards to cable?
So we do measure all of them. So this is the thing that I think was a bit of a challenge. So the number one distributor or network is actually YouTube, more than Netflix. And so it's about 11% of all time consumed. And if I go to those under 35, it's over 20%, over a fifth of the time. So we serve a time. So it was over the top, fast channels, streaming platforms. On the video side and similar on the audio side. That's time. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Dana Scher, work at Congressional Research Service, so I work for Congress. Some of them also cover competition issues. So what denominator?
And use Nielsen.
Yes, well, yes. But
Getting Congress to buy your service is really hard.
You did, yeah.
She was a champion.
So, speaking of which, what denominator should regulators use when they're looking at local market share of broadcast TV stations or other, I guess I would say broadcast media stations? Traditionally, it's been households and designated market areas with time periods,
Yes.
day parts. But with people streaming, it's demographic based. So how do you reconcile that evolution?
No, it's a good question. My belief is you should start with a measurement of time. A DMA is useful because it's where a broadcaster reaches and they have to reach a signal in a certain way.
Yeah.
But within that geography, I think if you're not looking at the total picture, you really risk making rules around the 7% that's still on broadcast.
Okay.
And if your goal in competition is to serve the market, then I think you want to know everything that they're receiving from everywhere. So I would do that. You probably still have to look at it at both levels, but to me, I think total time of total people. I also think, Nielsen was built on households. Households have a limitation in that, households were established at the time when most people watch TV as a household. That is not true. That is not true at all anymore. The cable companies connect to routers, those connect to Wi-Fi, and that means everybody can have their own TV. And so this is why even, our ratings are moving to a portable personal meter, because the people level is just super important to get right. So it's a shift, and you're gonna wanna compare before and after, but I think, I'm glad you're asking the question. I think getting about that is gonna be pretty important, because otherwise you're defining share of buggy whips.
Yeah, exactly, okay.
Yes, sir.
How are you preparing for the generation beyond Gen Z? Young people who are growing up, although you just sort of poo-pooed the idea of multitasking.
Oh, no, they're doing it.
They're doing it, and qualitative ratings, things like, CPA, continuing with partial attention. How do you get to audiences that aren't paying attention or doing something else?
Well, it's why the value of sports keeps going up, because there's less multitasking in that. I think you have to, for an advertiser, you definitely have to try to understand that. We're just measuring it. We are trying to, the issue is how do we attribute when they're doing 2 or 3 things at once, but we are trying to spend more time on that by what did they recall. There are ways to look at where the eyes are, that often what screen they're actually looking at tends to be the one they're most focused on. But it's a really important area to get right, and I think it's going to be even more true. This was reading my emails to me, so even as that becomes more pervasive, everything is going to have an advantage. Pardon?
How's Nielsen going to do
We'll do qualitative research to put factors on top of it. We'll probably end up, as a currency is what we've always done with outcomes, which is that there's a primary measure, which is absolute time, and then there's a secondary measure, which is more qualitative with a range around it, because you're never going to be as precise on that one. And I think these things, that's how we're going to enable it. I think the other thing we're working on at Nielsen is to make sure that our data is more fluid and able to be used with other systems. Now, the whole infrastructure of buying and selling of media is got to be overhauled to be more modern, but ultimately we need a system which makes it easier to adjust for those things in a way that both sides can trust. Yes, sir.
You mentioned data principles. Can you give us an idea of some areas where data principles have come into play, or maybe an example of what a data principle might look like for a given area?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the mechanism for a data principle is metadata, so data about the data that travels with it. So I would say if there's a newscast or a weather forecast, which I care about, is did the weather forecast come from NOAA and the National Weather Service? Having that data travel with the data would be a great way to know where its source was, versus it was derivative, or it came from somewhere else, or it came from Russia. So helping people to actually understand the origin is one. If you're seeing a piece of content, having the studio that own the intellectual property to produce that content, we've got trademarks, but having that actually travel with data and clips, if you go back to YouTube, there's a lot of little partial things. Being clear, sort of, where did that come from? Can you authenticate it? Was it real, or was it not? Was it generated by AI to look like a clip, or was it generated by AI to look like something out of a sports event that didn't really happen? So I think things that give you sort of tangible governance and provenance back to where it came from are going to be super important. I think the way many of you work together, you're going to trade data, you're going to share data, you're going to as you're doing that, to solve the questions between an advertiser and a media company, principles about the way data is exchanged, how it's used, what it can be used for, making sure it can't be used for other things. These are the kinds of things that I think if you put metadata around data, you can have a better control on it. The way you do with financial currency. Yes, sir.
Sort of piggybacking off the generation beyond Gen Z question, how will Nielsen tweak how they view the data when a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha people are getting a lot of their stuff from social media? We're seeing a lot of broadcasters and news stations change even their content to fit more social media as the social media changes more long form and whatnot outside of YouTube. How is that data, is that data relevant in general?
Well, I think it's very relevant because it's where an audience is, and there are Nielsen measures on TikTok and Instagram and other things. So it's used in those ways now. To the earlier question, it's used more for attribution of impact and attention than a share of time rating. Although we do see when it's multitask, I think those have to get tighter because you've got to measure that. And I think when you're trying to understand where did people get messages they believe, by survey research, people under the age of 35 say 38% of their news source is social media, and who they trust on social media is not the news organizations publishing it, it's friends and family. So there's just a movement here that's happening. It's a different discussion about what you want to do about that, but we measure it, and so I think that you're going to have to continue to measure that as part of the mix. And the way we do that is with hard data, because these things all have servers, and then again, I think panels of empirical evidence with real people are important to validate how much of that is real and how much of that is generated. Because there's a lot of audience that can also be, artificial intelligence can also be artificial audience. Those aren't real people. And maybe they can spend artificial money in artificial stores. But I think most people here at the end of the day are still gonna go back to GAAP and need cash flow. And so I do think it's really important that we be able to, and Gen Alpha is gonna be more complicated on that. Gen Alpha is gonna be confused between real people and a lot of artificial people. And being able to sort that is one of the things that we work on. Yes, sir.
So, coming from an ad sales broadcasting background, I need you to put on the Weather Channel hat.
Yep.
But I do see that our currency set, though, from an ad sales piece and using it is very different than from what a news director and looking at total reach of audience would be, especially within the local market. And that's something that I'd be curious to understand on what progress might be made to capture, as you say, in streaming. Well, that fast piece, it's not counted into the Nielsen rating. It is streaming. How does that capture to get a full audience versus a time period measurement of currency itself? Pass through versus stream, that would be a fast channel. So the ad load piece versus the total viewership.
Yeah, so it's there's a couple parts that I would unpack on that. What's interesting about the Nielsen ratings is because there are other folks that are measuring audience and creating currencies for advertising, but programmers really need to know share, because there is nothing to monetize without an audience. And so we certainly used it every day at Weather Channel to actually program, and so that's one thing. I think the programmers are absolutely looking at consumption, but not just by day part, because if you produce entertainment content and it's got a long tail, and fast channels are becoming, really important parts of that. You want to be able within the fast channel to get to individual content. So we're getting increasingly precise about that, so we can give back a content rating, which is everything that was. We used to have C3 and C7. Everything was viewed on the first day, 3 days, 7 days. Now it's forever because it just lives in the fast channel. On the advertising side, I would say the foundation is important to make sure you're not monetizing more than 100% of the audience. But then I think that the question of how does first-party data and individual data and sales data from the advertiser, how does that get mixed in, so that you've got a currency with a secondary guarantee around outcomes. And I just see more and more deals getting done that way. And it's getting easier and easier to do, so you can do it at the, we've been able to do it nationally, but do it at the station level. So it's evolving. But you do need the foundation, because otherwise, there's no way from the agency side, there's no way to know whether you're paying 2 or 3 times for the same audience, because it can't possibly be true. There just isn't enough time. If I added up everybody gives me their number, everybody added the numbers that their ad teams think they have, there's 420 million people or 36 hours a day. So you have to kind of adjust it. But I still think you've got to do it in a way that uses the other data to be more precise and targeted and attributed for the outcome.
David, on the streaming programs, what are you finding as far as advertising as compared to just strictly subscription?
You know, the first phase of streaming was largely ad-free, and you know, I didn't.
That's changing, isn't it?
It is, but the world kind of has people who will spend time to save money and people who will spend money to save time. And if I were to cut it by income, and a lot of advertisers want to reach people who have money to buy their product, I guess if you're selling a luxury good, if you're selling an automobile, it's hard. There's less inventory than ever, because people who can afford to buy new cars can also afford to buy SVOD services or ad-free versions of the platform. Whether it's Paramount Plus or Hulu, or whether buy the ad-free version. There's a growing scale, and this is part of why Netflix went into it, which is a super important market, but you got to deal with the demographics. So but I think people are using the technology to have less ad load, not more.
Why are NBA ratings down? 28%.
On the, you mean this season? Yeah. I don't know for sure, but I would say, you know, Adam and his team, they're looking at are people getting access to it in a different way. So the question is, do you have all the streaming in there? And are people watching highlights? Are people intrigued by it? So I don't have all the answers that you haven't unpacked it. I know that the team at NBA is, but there's no secular region that should be.
So the audience may be there.
Or they're watching it not live. They're watching. You know, we got to get under all the pieces of it. It's kind of somewhere. Yeah.
Let me maybe speak to that last question. But you mentioned that you were getting data from cars connected to the internet. Are there other places or other activities or other groups of people that you feel are not being counted, that you have your sights set on getting to somehow, or are you pretty comfortable with the level of measurement that you have now?
Well, you brought up Generation Alpha. Like I think you've got a generation which is literally connected 24/7. They're wearing Oura rings and they're wearing sensors. So there's a lot of other data. It's not all going to affect a rating, but I think we've got to understand maybe you've got pervasive sensors. You know, are there ways to use that to actually, you know, improve the quality? So I think we're always going to be looking for more data sources. And I think then when you get to driverless cars, do people have different media habits when they don't have to watch the road? And so I think there's a lot of new use cases we need to continue to look at.
David, thank you so much for a
Good to be with you.